ክቡራትና ክቡራን ጤና ይስጥልኝ። አዱኛው ወርቁ ነኝ። በዛሬው ቅንብራችን የምንነጋገረው ስለ ጤና ነው። ታሞ ከመማቀቅ አስቀድሞ መጠንቀቅ፣ ሳይያዙ ነው ሳይያዙ፣ ከተያዙ ወዲያ ብዙ ነው መዘዙ የሚል አነጋገር አለን በእኛ በባህላችን። እኛ ኢትዮጵያውያን ስለ ጤና ከፍ ያለ ግንዛቤ ነው ያለን። ጭራሽም ሰላምታችን ጤና ይስጥልኝ ነው የሚለው። ስለ ጤና ከፍተኛ ግንዛቤ አለን። ነገር ግን ቢወላወሉ እንደ ቅቤ ቅል መናገርና መስራት እየቅል ይባላልና የምናውቀውና በስራ ላይ የምንገልጠው አንድ ላይሆን ይችላል። በተለይ የምቾት ኑሮ በምንኖረው ኢትዮጵያውያን መካከል ለዛሬ ቅንብራችን በምግብ፣ በአመጋገብ፣ በጤና ላይ ምግብና የኑሮ ዘይቤ በጤና ላይ የሚያስከትሉት መዘዞች ምን እንደሆኑ የምትነግረን አንዲት እንግዳ ይዤላችሁ ቀርቤያለሁ። ቪኪ ሳውንደርስ ትባላለች እና ካሁን በኋላ ውይይታችን በእንግሊዘኛ ነው የሚሆነው። ይሄ የምንነጋገርበት አርዕስት ለሁሉም ሰው ጠቃሚ ስለሆነ የሚተረጉምላችሁ ሰው እንግሊዘኛ የማታውቁ ወገኖች ወደ አማርኛ የሚተረጉምላችሁ ሰው ብታገኙ መልካም ነው እላለሁ እና ከዚህ በኋላ ወደ እንግዳችን እንዞራለን። እንግዳችን እናስተዋውቃለን። ያመጣችልንን መልእክት እንሰማለን። Vicky, I would like to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to...
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you. You and I are not going to pretend that we don't know each other. We've known each other for many years. We are good friends, so we're going to be informal. You call me Adu, I call you Vicky.
That's great.
Okay. Let's start with some introductions. Could you tell us who you are, what you do, what your educational background, your professional practice, your family connection? I also happen to know, of course, that you have connections with Ethiopian. So if we could start with that.
Okay, let's start with that. My family went to live overseas when I was about 4 years old, first of all in Karachi, Pakistan. But then we moved to Ethiopia when I was 8. And we lived in Gimbi, Walaga, for about 5 years, where my father was a doctor for the Gimbi Adventist Hospital. Then after that, we moved to Addis Ababa, and my father was a doctor at the Empress Saudi II Memorial Hospital. So there was about 10 years of my growing up life that I spent in Ethiopia, and I consider very much a part of my heart as being Ethiopian.
We will consider you an Ethiopian.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So, but as my professional work is, my profession is nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian, and I have a master's degree, and I work at a hospital that has a special kind of treatment, and it's called lifestyle change. And so what I do is I help people make changes in their lifestyle that will help them to lose weight, to control diabetes, to lower their blood pressure, to lower their cholesterol, to try to reverse or reduce the risks of the chronic degenerative diseases that are the major killers in Western society. So that's what I do for a profession.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's identify the location where we are. That's always of interest to people. You work where?
I work at St. Helena Hospital, which is in Northern California, the town of St. Helena, and it's in Napa Valley for people who are more familiar. That's about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco.
Okay. Now, I'm not a nutritionist, so but I am interested and have been interested for a while. If we have time, we'll get into that. In our conversations, we in preparation for this program, we talked about different diseases that afflict people in different places. And these are referred to, at least in the literature that I read, infectious diseases, lifestyle diseases, and hereditary diseases. Could you lay the groundwork for that, for us, so that we can move to the one that we're going to focus on?
Right. Well, the diseases that you generally find in, say, developing countries tend to be the diseases that have to do with infections, where people may not have had enough exposure to vaccines or antibiotics or those sorts of medications. They also tend to be the diseases that have to do with sanitation practices. So it's the purity of the water, it's the disposal of sewage, it's the washing of hands, all those sorts of things that in developed countries usually develop protected water systems and that kind of thing. So those are the diseases that you tend to find more in developing countries. And of course, you sometimes also find the diseases that are associated with scarcity. So you may have famine, you may have malnutrition. Because of that, it's pretty common to see things like kwashiorkor or marasmus in the countries of Africa and Pakistan.
What are those? I don't know what those are.
Those are protein and protein calorie malnutrition.
Okay.
And people who work with them all the time can usually identify it just by looking at it. Because children who should have black hair may have a rusty colored reddish hair when they're malnourished. And so they do have signs of that malnutrition. So all of those are the things that contribute to the disease processes of people in those that live in those societies. In the developed societies, they have been to a large measure protected from those kinds of diseases because of proper sewage and clean water and vaccinations and all of that kind of thing. But in the developed countries, there is a huge range of what are known as chronic degenerative diseases. And those are things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and all the consequences that come from those diseases. And those are the diseases of excess. Those are the diseases of people who are surrounded by more calories than they need, more refined products than they need, and are taking full advantage of those things. In fact, a statistics that's frequently quoted is that in the hospitals of the United States and Canada and the Western world, probably 80% of the patients in those hospitals wouldn't need to be sick if they didn't smoke, if they exercised, and if they ate a better diet. So that's like 70 to 80%.
So that many people literally make themselves sick.
That's right.
Oh my God.
So the rest of them are the true medical tragedies.
Yeah. Now, the hereditary ones, of course, are weaknesses in our genes, in our makeup that we have no control over.
Right. But interestingly enough, if a person is genetically predisposed to getting a certain disease, and I know this more around these diseases of excess, say diabetes or certain cancers, lifestyle still will flip the switch. They will either switch those genes on or they may switch them off. There's some recent studies, 3 of them that just came out in June of this year, showing that when people ate a more plant-based diet and did more exercise and did stress management techniques, that they could switch. It was over 500 genes. Some of them were switched off, and those were the cancer-promoting genes, and some of them were switched on, and those were the protective genes. So lifestyle can also affect genes.
I heard the expression that it's like a loaded gun.
Yeah.
And if you don't pull the trigger, that gun doesn't go off often.
Yes.
So
sometimes a trauma can pull the trigger. I will see most of the time when people get diabetes, it's because they have a genetic predisposition and they have gained a lot of weight or some weight. But I know a person that I work with who has Crohn's disease, and he has to take, or had to for a period of time, take.
Crohn's disease means?
It's an intestinal disease that's like an autoimmune disease, and it's actually a very unpleasant thing to have. Both of his parents were diabetics, and so he did have the genetic predisposition to diabetes, but he had always been an exerciser and took care of his health. And until the time when they put him on prednisone, which is a steroid medication, to control his Crohn's disease, he didn't have it, but the prednisone triggered it. And so now he has diabetes that he has to control. So in his case, it wasn't the weight gain that triggered it, it was the medication that triggered it. But that's the smaller percentage. Usually it's lifestyle.
Yeah. Just as a follow-up, in the last 20, 30 years, there has been a lot of migration of Ethiopians from Ethiopia to everywhere in the world. It's a new phenomenon. And I'm just wondering, in that migration, what actually happens, whether you choose intentionally or not. And some of the migrations have been from rural Ethiopia. A lot of it is from urban Ethiopia, people educated at least with high school education and up. But in some cases, particularly in the case of the Beit Israel or Falasha, as we refer to them in Ethiopia, a large population of Ethiopian Jews migrated from rural Ethiopia to Israel, and there's a lot of literature talking about them, which I suspect is not much different from us Ethiopians in Australia, Europe, and North America.
I would think it would be very, very similar. You know, I was doing some research before coming here, and most of the published research about Ethiopians moving from Ethiopia to a more westernized society are the Falashas who moved from Ethiopia to Israel. And so there are various kinds of studies that have come out. When those Ethiopians came to Israel, they came in two major migration groups. Operation Moses, which you're somewhat familiar with.
Yes.
Those that really had a long, long trek, to try to get out of Ethiopia and to get there. They had pretty much zero diabetes and zero obesity. The second group were known as Operation Solomon, and they went in 1991.
From Addis to...
they flew.
The first wave went from the Sudan, the refugee camps and so on. They walked all the way from North Gondar and the surrounding areas to the Sudan, and they were picked up from there. But the second wave were from Addis Ababa.
Right. And that group had probably 0.4% of diabetes, so it still wasn't very high, of the population. But by the time they had been in Israel for 2 to 4 years, it had started to rise. It went up to close to 9%, and then when you throw in the people who were pre-diabetic, and very much on their way, it went to about 17%, which is what I'm seeing quoted. And that's actually higher than the population of Israel itself. The difference probably has to do with some genetic makeup. And we won't spend a lot of time on it here, but it's a gene that is referred to as the thrifty gene. And it develops in populations who have had to deal with scarcity, and they have developed survival genes that help them with scarcity. But if you take people like that and you put them in the midst of plenty where there is no more scarcity, their risk for those kinds of diseases is probably even higher than the people who have never had scarcity.
Is that because the gene does not make the switch from scarcity or famine to plenty? It still thinks, you have to be careful. Why is that?
Well, I don't know the total mechanism for it, but we see it in population groups in South America as well. There's a lot of studies that have been done on the Pima Indians that live in Arizona, in this country. And genetically, they are related to the Pima Indians who live in South America. Those Pima Indians who live in this country, they have an obesity rate of 80%, and they have a diabetes rate of about 50%. If you compare them to their South American counterparts, the men in this country weigh an average of 55 pounds more, and the women weigh an average of 45 pounds more. And those who live in South America still plow behind a wooden plow pulled by an oxen. The women still go to the river to do their laundry, and they still walk everywhere they go. And so, and their diet is primarily corn and beans and potatoes are the staple of their diet. And so you have people with that gene and that original lifestyle moved into plenty, where they drive everywhere they go, and they eat a very different kind of a diet, and it has really been a problem.
And sit and watch TV the rest of the time.
And watch TV,
yeah.
right.
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah. I mean, you yourself have described to me before the amount of physical activity that is done in a walking society.
Yes. Yes, of course. You know, my background is rural, and I mean, walking and working was plenty.
Yeah. So if you have...
And the diet too. I mean, the diet was plant-based, basically,
right. Yeah.
with occasional indulging in poultry and meat and that kind of dairy type of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, if immigrant Ethiopians still did that much walking, their bodies might forgive a little more the diet change that they make. But when it changes, it really increases your risk of the degenerative diseases.
We're going to focus on Ethiopians. Obviously, the audience here, this presentation can help anybody, but the primary audience is Ethiopian. So, but before we get there, when we talked, you mentioned something about the role of nutrition and the two sides of nutrition. Maybe you have addressed them already, but the two sides of nutrition, what's that?
Well, let me clarify that a little bit. When I talk about nutrition to people, sometimes they're approaching it thinking of the malnutrition of scarcity. And in fact, a lot of people who live in a country of plenty still take vitamin supplements, protein supplements, various kinds of things, which is intended to keep them from getting deficient. And so one of the faces of nutrition is to prevent deficiency, to eat enough of the nutrients you need in order to be in good health. And that is to keep your brain functioning, your heart functioning, your bones strong, your muscles strong. All of the bodily functions require nutrients in order to perform and to function and to be healthy. So that, in fact, you go back 100 years in this country, and that is the primary emphasis. You hear people talking about the 4 food groups, or balanced meals, or balanced diet, or square meals, or all sorts of phrases that refer to eating a balance. And I don't know if in Ethiopia there's the same kind of vocabulary, but that is the kind of language that is used. But unfortunately, now when you're in a land of plenty, there's another face of nutrition, and that's the malnutrition of excess. And that is the kind of nutrition that eats too much refined carbohydrates, and that is primarily white flour and white sugar and corn syrup are the major ones that we see around here. But there's other forms of refined carbohydrate as well. And that is too much fat, particularly animal fat. So that is higher amounts of meat, higher amounts of whole milk and whole milk cheese and butter, and too much salt, and too little of the fruits and the vegetables and whole grains and fiber and all of those kinds of things. Now, in the groups that I work with who come to see me at our lifestyle programs, I ask them to fill out food diaries before they come. And then I use a nutrition software.
Food diaries meaning what they eat every day?
Keep a record of what they eat for at least 3 days. Some of them do longer than that. And then I put it into my computer nutrition database and I print out a report. And that tells me what they're getting too much of and what they're getting too little of. And I have quite a few people who have both going on. Because in eating too much refined foods, they're depleting themselves also of good nutrition.
I was reading something in preparation for this conversation, and a statement jumped out of me, which is the same thing you said. We have more kinds of food, but less nutrition.
That's true.
I mean, there is a nutrition deprivation in the midst of plenty.
Yes. And for so many people, there's an inadequate understanding that is the case. And in fact, many times they feel like if they take a supplement, that's going to also just, substitute for eating food, but it really does not. Healthful food, and that is generally whole foods. That's fruits, and that's vegetables, that's whole grains, that's beans, that's nuts, that's lean or low fat, protein choices or dairy choices. Those healthful foods have a lot more protective substances in them than people are aware of, or than people can get in a vitamin pill. For example, the food that is most associated with vitamin C is oranges. An orange is made up of at least 150 different nutritional components, one of which...
150?
At least. One of which is vitamin C. If you take a vitamin C pill, you will prevent yourself from getting scurvy, which is the vitamin C deficiency disease. But you won't get that whole other 149 that come with it, that may help to protect you from cancer, from inflammation, which we'll talk about some more too. All those things that contribute to the chronic degenerative diseases.
So the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away,
has a lot of truth. It has a lot of truth.
Now, I have a confession to make, and I suspect it's a confession of many people who hold degrees, higher education degrees. And 5-6 years ago, with all the degrees that I hold and the academic status of full professor that I have, I found myself literally illiterate when it came to nutrition. The college, Pacific Union College, is where I work. And the college has a policy now that every employee of the college has to have an annual checkup to see what kinds of health risks we have and determine if those are genetic or lifestyle related. If they're genetic, the college says, you can't help it. If it is lifestyle, we have two choices. We can say, this is my personal life, it's none of your business, I will live however I want to live, but they will not cover our insurance. But if we're willing, hey, I will do whatever it is that we're supposed to do, then they do. As a matter of fact, they even refund the co-payment that we have. The illiteracy I'm talking about is by and large, and I don't think I am an exception. Up to about 6 years ago, I ate what I liked to eat, and lots of it in one sitting. I didn't care about balance. I didn't know what nutrients I would get from this, that, and the other. I was simply ignorant. I went to a conference. My wife insisted that I went there. The college had its own requirements, but I had it at home too.
And your wife is a nutrition
conscious? Yes, she's a nurse and she's very conscious of nutrition. Right. But I resisted. I resisted with all my might until about 6 years ago. I had some very unhealthy symptoms. Fortunately, a result of lifestyle, not genetics. So I could do something about it. When I went to that conference, the guy insulted us, basically. He said, most of you, if not all of you in this room, have either a high school diploma or college degrees or masters or PhDs. But there is one equalizer. All of you would be at ground zero when it comes to nutrition. There may be an exception, and then he gave us a quiz, and we flunked. PhD, masters, bachelors, it didn't matter. We failed. We failed. We flunked. He also brought a fork, which I have never forgotten, and he said, "You know how many graves this fork has dug?"
Yeah.
He said, "People dig their graves with a fork." So what is it that we need to do to be, literate, aware, educated in matters of nutrition? I mean, we can't go back to school and earn a diploma or a degree or anything, but what, can you give us, in a very, very obviously abbreviated fashion, what should we do?
Well, I can give you some summaries, and some shorthand, but I can also mention resources, because now there's a lot of nutrition information that's available online, in books. And one of the things that people complain about is, that scientists are always changing their mind. Well, they do keep doing research, and sometimes the research shows that something we thought made sense, is not the case after all. So there are things that change. But there are certain basic things that sort of keep coming to the top, and they keep coming to the top. And one of those basic things is to eat a diet that is predominantly plants. About 2 years ago, there was a article written in the National Geographic, and it was about longevity cultures. And they looked at, they found at least 3 that they looked at, and the man who did that research has now published a book called Blue Zones. And the blue zones are just those zones that show up on the map as having greater longevity. That's where the name comes from. But they were people who lived in Italy, the Sardinians. They were the Okinawans from Japan. And they were the Seventh-day Adventists in the Loma Linda area of Southern California. The things that
Oprah had a program on that.
Right, and she was hosting the author of this book.
Okay.
So that's what that was about. So this is like 2 years later, he's got the book published based on the original articles that he did. And but the thing that was in common in all of those cultures is that they ate a diet that is predominantly plants. Within the Adventist subculture, some are vegetarian and some are not. And when they compared those who were vegetarian to those who were not, they had greater longevity and a lower disease profile.
The vegetarians.
The vegetarians. But in addition to that, those who were vegetarian, who had never smoked, who exercised regularly, and who kept their body weight, within a certain, more healthful range, they had a longevity average that was like about 10 years longer than the rest of the population. And when you talk about statistics, that is huge. Because recently I heard some statisticians say is that if you cured all of the cancer in this country, you would increase the longevity by about 3 years. So when you take cancer as being, say, the second or third highest killer, and you take all of that out and you get 3 years in the statistics from that, what is the implication of 10 years? That's a huge difference. And it has to do with this range of healthful behaviors. In Okinawa, their average breakdown of diet was vegetables and fruit and grains were like 70% by weight, 72% by weight. Soy foods and seaweed products, which they tend to eat, not all other parts of the world do, those foods were about 11%. I think I'm misquoting that. I think it was the fish that was 11%. But the plant foods were like 80-something percent. Red meat, chicken, and eggs altogether were 3%.
Of their diet.
Of their diet. And they have the highest number of centenarians, 100 plus years old people, and a lot of 70, 80 and 90 years old. In fact, they featured a man who was in his late 80s or early 90s who still fishes by diving off of a boat into the water. And his family is in despair that he won't give up his fishing, so they've painted a phone number on his boat so that if he ever gets lost at sea and somebody finds the boat, they'll call them and tell them that they found it. But that's what he's still doing. Now, the younger generation in Okinawa has the fastest growing rate of obesity in Japan.
Because of a change in diet?
Because of a change in diet
and lifestyle.
And so they probably will not achieve the longevity of their grandparents.